This is We the Sales Engineers podcast, show 168.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramzi Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. I am your host, Ramzi Majaba. In front of me is my co-host, who has a guitar behind him. So, my co-host, Binayak, the guitarist Kanungo. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's actually not even my guitar; it's my beard's guitar.
It's your beard's guitar. Okay.
Right now. I don't know how to play.
Does your beard know how to play? Do you want to play something?
It's practicing. No, he's a little shy. It's a little shy. You know, it's coming out though. It's like the skill is going to eventually like be good enough to play in front of people. So I hear, anyways.
Okay. I didn't tell you this, but I promised myself not to make fun of your beard anymore. And then you keep bringing it up. I wanted to change it up a little bit. That's why I didn't call you the beard today. I said the guitarist. But hey, you want to bring it back to the beard. So myself and the beard had an interview today. We talked to Greg Holmes of Aptio. So if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, he's been on the show a couple of times before, show 100 being one of them, with Chris White and John Kerr, which was great. Today, we've talked in the past, specifically to Benny, about moving companies, but he's a lowly SE. He didn't have to face a lot of the things that, I love how you're just nodding your head. You should watch the YouTube video and you'll see how interactive Benny has been. So we're talking to Greg specifically about him moving as a VP, which brings in a whole different set of complications.
For sure. No, it was fascinating. I mean, so much to share. And obviously, you kind of alluded to some of the other shows that he's been on in the past. You know, show 100 was a big one. But yeah, like that perspective as a VP, kind of what one needs to kind of consider. Also, there was kind of an international component to it as well. So, you know, if those of you that are interested in that whole like international business side of things and how things differ from one place to another, you know, there's some of that which was really cool to kind of listen in on and talk about. So sounds like a pretty good show ahead of us.
Let's jump into the show then.
Let's do it.
Good afternoon, Greg. How are you doing?
Hi there. I'm really good. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. So, Greg Holmes, you've been on a few times. I remember off the top of my head, show 100, because it was a big show. And you were on once before, I think, in the 60s. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Oh, I thought it was actually in the 30s, but yeah.
In the 30s. I'll have to double check. We'll put a link in the show notes for your episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's good to be back. It's good to be back. And this time I'm sitting hopefully in a quiet room without a dog about to bark and without the airport making a lot of noise. So hopefully you'll get to hear me properly.
No, it's good. Actually, it was at the airport. It wasn't so bad. And I don't remember the dog barking. It added a little bit character actually to the show, if I had remembered it. So how you been? It's been a while. So what's
it has? Well, that we had this whole lockdown thing where we couldn't travel anymore, and we had to perfect our remote demonstrations and dealing with customers remotely and working as teams remotely from each other. So I feel like a lot has changed, but you've probably talked a lot about that in recent weeks. I've certainly enjoyed listening to some recent episodes about, you know, the joys of you know, the new way of working.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. All right, so one of the topics that I wanted to talk to you about, which we just briefly touched on, last time we talked to you, you were with one company, and now you're a VP at a different company. How was that transition? Like, I don't know if you mind me asking, like, why did you decide to move initially?
Yeah, well, that's always a good question. I think to make a move, I think you want it to do something for yourself, right? So I'd been working in the same organization for, you know, eventually, if you add it all up, a very long time, like 19 years, over an organization that shifted, was acquired. You know, I moved from being an individual contributor from a very junior one to a fairly senior one, and then eventually into management and directing an operation across Europe. And for me, you know, I'd achieved a lot in that time. And there were still more things I probably could have stayed and looked to achieve in the future. but also it was a wonderful new technology for me at Apptio. So looking at understanding the whole of IT spend, how to really understand cloud spend and optimize that. So there was great technology reasons to make the move, and still are, right? It's really an exciting company, and if any of you are looking for a job, please look us up. We're always hiring. But then for me also, it was a chance to be the leader for Europe for pre-sales. And for me, that was really exciting. I was, if you like, the deputy leader before. I ran certain go-to markets and owned part of the overall solution and part of the overall team. But for me, this was a chance to be the pre-sales leader in Europe for Apptio.
Okay. So Benny, I know you're taking a lot of notes. Do you want to ask your question? You're on mute, as usual.
I could take a whole pandemic and I still won't get used to that. Yeah, so you did mention something interesting there, and maybe getting a little ahead of ourselves with respect to your new position and whatnot. But I guess you mentioned over in your last organization, you're there for quite some time, and also there have been quite a few changes and just developments that took place over the course of the 19 years that you were there, whether they be acquisitions or otherwise. I guess, and every experience is different, but did in any way that experience within those 19 years of the changes you had to deal with internally, whether it be because of new management, new ownership, or anything like that, did that at all prepare you for the changes you had to kind of adjust to when moving to a whole new organization?
Yeah, I'd say so, right? Because I think your experiences, they develop over time, but the more you keep doing the same things, I guess eventually, you're only learning what's different each time. So for me, just the matter of it being a significant change meant that my eyes were opened up to new ways of thinking about similar problems and very different problems over time. So for me, during the acquisition phase, that was quite exciting. It was a big change for me, a change from being a very small team to a very big team, relatively speaking. And that was interesting, but also the need to learn totally new solutions, right? New go-to markets, new product areas that you weren't thinking about before. So the rapid learning kind of phase, which I think every SE gets to experience some stage in their career. But also the organizational, right? You realize that there's not just one way. Just as we know, there's not one place that all pre-sales teams fit into their organization. There's not just one definition of what pre-sales is. In my previous organization, pre-sales was relatively broad. We'd get drawn into post-sales, pre-sales, sometimes marketing, sometimes, even customer support and services and things like that. My newer organization, we're quite focused, I would say. We are very much part of that sales team, getting involved in mostly well-qualified deals, and then handing it off to a customer success organization at the point of sale, but still having a small involvement, but not that same kind of long-term involvement on the day-to-day of those customers. So interesting in terms of those changes.
Very much so. Actually, and just to that last point, especially now, like having a much more narrow focus, or I guess the mandate of the SC team having a much more narrow focus. Do you think that's more, or is that I don't know if symptom is the right word, but is that something that you expect to be common? Like, I guess the difference, is that due to the size of the organizations between where you were before and where you are now? Or can you even see, let's say, smaller organizations also having a much more limited mandate?
I think smaller organizations, you have to do more, right? As you're part of a startup, your job title might say one thing, but you end up having to do other stuff to make sure you're successful. And I still see that in smaller territories, right? We have small teams in some countries in Europe where there might be a pre-sales person, a salesperson, and maybe a services person. But at any point in time, those titles are fixed, but you have some kind of quantum movement between all those different roles, right? The pre-sales person sometimes has to be more salesy or more helping existing customers or things like that. So I think you get into a state where having a narrower definition of what pre-sales is, it's more focused, right? You add a lot of value in that area that you're focused in, and that is a good thing, I think, in general. And bigger organizations get that luxury of telling people to focus in a particular area.
Fair, that makes sense.
If they're built correctly.
If they're built correctly.
Yeah.
And any size organization, I'd look at what happens between different roles. Like, so for instance, what happens between pre-sales and post-sales.
Yeah.
that's because there's a phase transition. If it's not working right, that's where problems are going to occur. If it's working really well, you have both sides trying to make sure it works, right? And hardly anything gets dropped in those places.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. All right. So when you moved companies, how, like when you started with your previous company, you said you grew as part of it, so you knew the players, you knew the politics. Not that there are any politics in our world. Uh, you were part of the organization, like you part of the culture, and now you moved to a different company. How did you go about learning the new culture, making sure you don't step on anybody's toes?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's easy to get worried about making mistakes, right? I think in my first 30 days, I made a big point about not focusing too much just on the tech, but focusing much more on the people. So getting to know first everyone who was in my new team, getting to know the salespeople that depended on that team and the different sales leaders. There was some new sales leaders at the same time, so it was them getting to know their teams. So there was a lot of new, fresh kind of relationships being, built, and a lot of new things happening, but also learning what works elsewhere in the organization. So the US had a very mature organization and operation compared to Europe. So learning a lot of what happens in the US, how is it working there, and how could we learn some of those good things that are happening and bring them into the team in Europe.
Okay. So yeah, like kind of similarly, when I changed companies, I had to learn about my teammates, my products, my customers, and all that. But I imagine there's a little bit more to it when you're the VP. Is there anything else that as individual contributors we don't think about that we had to learn, that you had to learn?
You have to learn what's the cadence of the overall organization. So how quick are sales happening? What's the length of time that you're working on deals in say from the sales operation versus the marketing side, from leads, and who owns it at different points in time. So that whole racy model, if you like, changes depending on organization a fair bit. So I had to learn, where did pre-sales really take the lead in the organization, which part of the opportunity, how long were our POVs, that we called them POVs and rather not POCs, and how do we come up with customer value? How do we describe that to customers and ensure that they understood the value of the solutions on offer, and really how much was involved in justifying the value versus proving that it actually works.
Do you think that's interesting information for an IC to also have, I guess, coming into a new organization, to at least like have that context in order to be as effective an IC as possible?
I think so. Definitely knowing how the business is run, right? What are the important metrics to the sales organization and the pre-sales organization? What do the processes look like? How do I get recognized on deals? Those kinds of things become really important for an IC. How do I do the deals myself? How do I become the person that will get called up when there is a new opportunity to work on?
Fair.
So it seems that there's a lot of things that you needed to learn, and generally people, when they move companies, they need to learn. A big struggle that I see from people is like, what do I learn first? Do I learn the technology? Do I learn the customers? Do I learn the customers so I can learn the technology? Do I learn what my account manager likes to work with? How do you suggest people, or how did you actually do it? How did you choose what to focus on?
One thing I was really lucky with was that my predecessor was actually staying in the organization and moving into a new role. So I could actually call up my predecessor and ask him about, how different people were working, what kinds of projects were going on, what promises we'd made people in the past, and could we keep them, keep up with them, direction in their careers and things like that. So I did lean on him quite a bit to understand the regular kind of way that team worked and how they operated, but also what was the plan, what was the long-term strategy, and could we maintain and keep some of that going. Sometimes there were some things that we needed to change and go away from, but there were some good things that we could keep going with as well, that really helped maintain momentum and direction.
Okay. And When you're in kind of that role, when you're brand new, how do you have an impact as early as possible? If you see something that they're doing, in your opinion, incorrectly, how do you have an impact on changing that without pissing people off? I guess I should add that.
Yeah, I think it becomes a lot like selling then, right? So you have to listen very well, right? You want to see how attached are they to the way things are going, and are they doing it just because that's the way they've been taught and never thought to question it, or is there a real purpose and definition around why it's being done that way? So bringing in new ideas is really about selling. At the end of the day, you need to get a benefit, ask the right questions, and then find someone who's interested in making that change with you, rather than being forced to make a change, right? So Bene, I don't want you to submit your activities now in just in your diary and into this spreadsheet. I want you to log into Salesforce every day and log 10 new activities. Is that okay?
Out of the blue, I've never even logged in before.
Yeah. But that kind of thing, right? Having the agreement from people of why is this change interesting and why is it good for them as well.
It's funny, like the best part of what you just said was it's part of selling. That means a lot of listening, which is not what a lot of people think about selling. Oh, it's a part of selling, we have to convince people. I just love the fact that you just said it's listening. Selling is listening, not something else. That was an interesting fact.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, when you move into a new company, you're responsible to grow that pre-sales team, or at least hopefully not fire a lot of people. How do you start working on that as part of a new company, or actually any existing company, if you will?
Yeah, so I think you have to look at where are the needs, right? So for this organization, we had certain areas we're looking to grow the business, and Europe is still a growth part of the organization, right? So we're still looking to keep growing. It was about identifying, how many heads essentially did we need in the organization compared to what it was already, and where are they needed, right? Are we aligning pre-sales people to individual sellers? Are we aligning them to territories or countries? And in Europe, we've got the challenge of having the right language mix, which, Canada, you've got a bit of that too, right? So you need a bit of French speaking and English speaking, depending on where and when, you might be selling and talking to people. But location is important too, right? If all of the deals are on one side of the country and you've got all of your people in the same office in the other end of the country, that would not be ideal either.
Yeah, inside sales.
Yeah. So, we did. So we looked at where do we need people first, and then going out and hiring. Of course, you have to reach out to your network. You need to see how well connected is the company as such, right? Does it have its own recruiting function, or is it external? So how do you find the people that might join, and then reach out to them and see if they're interested in joining, and what the process you have, whether you've got your own standards and HR processes to hire with.
So speaking of hiring, I saw a complaint on LinkedIn yesterday. The person was talking about having 9 interviews as part of the hiring process. In the past, we used to go on site and talk to 10 people, and it was considered one interview. But now setting up 9 interviews seems to be pissing people off.
Yeah, it's a bit of a gauntlet, right?
Yeah. So how do you do that? Especially as sales, when everybody's all over the place, it's not necessarily, even before, we never went on site, or we rarely went on site for a full day. Is 9 interviews reasonable in the SE world?
I'd say 9 sounds excessive, but I could see how it might happen if there's multiple roles or different, stakeholders who might be hiring at the same time, right? So 9 sounds too many for one job that you're applying for. But if it was useful to consider you for multiple roles, then it still sounds like a lot. But and a good recruitment process would streamline it, right? They would say, no, we're only going to have 5, and if 3 different hiring managers need to see you, then they're either in that 5, or they're in a panel together or something like that, right? So that you don't get asked the same questions by 9 different people.
It's I've had that where I interviewed, there was a recruiter, hiring manager, 3 SEs, all at different times. So we're already at 5. one account manager, VP of sales, VP of sales engineer. We're already at 8. Then the demo. So I don't know. It seems like it's becoming more prevalent now for some reason. Like that was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse, I feel.
Yeah, that sounds excessive, particularly for an individual kind of role. I think the best case you'd aim to do 2 or 3 different people to have solo interviews and then a panel, and that should be enough. If there's too much doubt after those sessions, then you probably shouldn't be hiring them. Or if if you don't have enough positive signal after all of that, then they're probably not going to make it through either. But if there is positive after 2 or 3, then I think each extra person you bring in is going to just help you stop hiring the right people.
Right. Yeah. I doubt. So going back to growing the pre-sales team, there's a shortage from what I've seen. There's a shortage of sales engineers.
Yeah.
But most hiring managers don't want to hire new sales like aspiring. They want someone with experience because they don't want to spend the time training, from what I've seen. How do you go about finding the right people for your company?
It's a great question. And I think going back to what you said, I think hiring managers generally need to look for competency over experience, right? And experience is great. It's showing a proven track record and everything, but it still doesn't necessarily mean that they can do what you need them to do in a pre-sales role. So a good proportion of good pre-sales people will come from the domain experience side as well. So if you're selling to sales forces, then chances are you need someone who understands how a sales force operates and all of that, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the pre-sales person in that sales force. But if you were selling to a manufacturing business or a construction business, that domain experience could come from construction or from manufacturing. And just you need to teach them then the pre-sales part. But if you were really lazy and only wanted to hire pre-sales people, you'll still need to teach those pre-sales people the domain stuff if they don't come, with all of the things you want. So hiring managers need to accept that they're only going to get some of those elements of experience that they wanted anyway. And so they should be looking out for the competency.
How much would you say the account managers have a say in the hiring of an SE?
They tend to be good at recommending people. So a lot of good people will come because of that recommendation. I like to use someone from the sales organization because I don't want to hire people that aren't going to, fit in well, culturally and, with that sales team. And I have different sales teams around Europe, so they might gravitate to different kinds of pre-sales people. But I wouldn't want them too involved either, right? You need to test out their technical know-how and their pre-sales potential. And I think that comes from your pre-sales leaders really being able to assess with them.
The reason I'm asking is I've seen it in the past where a salesperson pressures an SE manager to hire specific people just because they like them. Mm-hmm. And then they went up to their bosses who then put more pressure on the SE manager, which is kind of like the politics of being an SE leader and all that. As an SE leader yourself, like you're the VP, you own the country, the continent, I guess. How do you manage that?
I support the continent.
Sure. Yeah.
But I look to try and get consensus and buy-in, right? I'm not looking to get a yes, no from people, but I want them to be supportive. And I've seen situations where the salesperson might not have been sure about the candidate, but they weren't against them. And they were able to defer their whether if they were technically strong enough or a good fit for the role, they were okay with that. But it wasn't for them to judge the parts that they weren't sure about. I think the most sure that a sales team can be, though, about the pre-sales person is that they know that they fit in well, they can sell well, but they still can't, tell you that they're going to be technically good enough to do that role.
Right.
Yeah, I do like a lot of what you said there, especially the idea for sales teams in particular to kind of find that culture fit, because there could be such a clash between, let's say, a pre-sales support person and let's say the sales team themselves. Even if the pre-sales person knows everything technically, but just doesn't really mesh well from a social perspective with the team, it's Yeah, it's a weird dynamic without a doubt. So yeah, finding that overall culture fit is definitely huge, and maybe they could learn from there. But speaking of culture, I did want to ask you, and also seeing the SC map behind you is pretty cool as well. I did want to, and you also mentioned a little bit earlier too, this idea of you kind of taking on some practices that the Americans kind of had going on within their organization. Were there any cultural differences that surprised you? And perhaps that was one of them between how things were done, let's say, at Europe and back in, or not back in, but rather in the States as well, that they didn't expect?
I think so. The sales process feels a bit different in America, right? In certain countries in Europe, there is a lot more emphasis on the technical part of a sales process, in that the customers can be more demanding for POVs. They might want those POVs to be longer, and they might also want them to be almost all be side by side against other tools at the same time. So you do get a lot more technical reliance in parts of the sales process. That would be one thing I'd call out. The other thing, getting back to the country language kind of dynamic here in Europe, is that it is quite important to have some local pre-sales knowledge with the customer. So it's like there's different kinds of pre-sales team members. In Europe, I need local customer experts, if you like, who get their customers, get their domain and their industry and all of that better. But they might need to call in a specialist for some of the technical knowledge areas. Whereas in the US, you could probably get, or North America, you could get by with a team that are geographically located enough, close enough to customers, but you might be able to get a technical expert, or a product kind of area expert closer to those customers more often as the main point of contact, and rely less on that language, local understanding kind of expert.
Fair. No, I appreciate that. And that makes sense. And yeah, now that you mentioned the whole European, or rather there being a little bit more of an emphasis on maybe the technical requirements with European companies, just in Europe in general. Yeah, even in my short time, I've definitely noticed that more, that RFPs are a little bit more, or our RFIs are a little bit more detailed, go into a little more, get a little more granular. And yeah, the relationship building, I suppose, is a little bit easier to be done on the American side first, and then going into the technical stuff after the fact. But just, I guess, being aware of that and appreciating those differences is huge. And to also know that you're able to kind of adopt some practices that were taking place in one place into where you are now is very, very cool.
Thanks. Yeah, it's awesome. I'd say one other thing is pre-sales often get to interact a lot with product management and product marketing, and having those close relationships, getting back to what you should do in your early time in a company, is getting to know those functions well, because you'll depend on those people and you want to give them feedback. And that feedback loop is really important for pre-sales.
So true.
I did want to ask, like, in some of the companies that I've worked at, SEs are tied one-to-one with account managers. Right? So it's easy to find out when it's time to hire a new SE, because, hey, if there's an account manager without an SE, hire an SE. How do you decide if it's time to hire someone when you don't have that one-to-one tie, or maybe like even hire a salesperson to grow the business a little bit more, or to split territory? How do you make that decision?
Yeah. So, you try to operate on an overall level of, what the average is, and in terms of that ratio of pre-sales to sales. And I know you want a magic answer for what's the ideal ratio, but it depends on the technology in the company, right? How in-depth does that technology require technical proof, and what's the load on each role during the sales process, which changes over time. For most organizations, though, like particularly my language specific problems, anytime we put someone in a new country as a salesperson, they will need some local pre-sales support. So it becomes pretty important to start out an extra pre-sales person, and a slightly more expensive operation than other, if you were opening up another sales head in a country where you already had pre-sales. Once you're there, though, you need to see what is the load, if you like, on each of those individuals, and can they take more salespeople, or if you hire more salespeople, are you getting to the stage that you also need more pre-sales people, and then work out what is that ideal kind of load. So it's really a business decision about, will your current pre-sales team be able to cope with another salesperson in that location? and then decide, and that needs to be a coordinated kind of action between sales and pre-sales leaders.
Yeah, that's why I just talked to someone, technical director at VMware in Canada, and he kind of said, like, we were talking about sanity and burnout and all that, especially with COVID, like people are not stopping. And he mentioned that he implemented the system where at 5 or 5:30 he goes up and sits outside and makes calls outside by the pool. And
Love that.
he suggested that people, so that show is out today. He suggested that his SEs who are not below, like one level below, so there's him, managers, and then SEs, should do the same, because it's the company, the organization that made the business decision not to hire more SEs. There are the off chance that you have to work weekends or late nights, but if that's the normal, then you should do something about it. And
yeah, and I think it's another feedback area, right? You need to be able to feedback to the sales organization, the leaders of the sales organization at least. This is what the overall utilization of that team looks like. And as you're getting to that kind of, that tipping point of this is too much work, we're going to have to start saying no to things, or we're going to have to start, only taking some of these calls whilst we're on the move, whilst we're doing other things. That's going to degrade the level of service you can offer. And that, you don't want to degrade no one in pre-sales wants to not give their best, is my finding. So always trying to share, here's how busy the team is this week. And I try to get newsletters out to my sales leaders about that kind of thing. Here's what we're working on for you, and here's how busy we are right now. Here's what is actually queued up for the future, so that they can see literally these things are slowing, these are the things that are affecting whether we can take on more work, and letting them help you make those priority decisions.
Okay. And one thing that seems to may either help SEs or actually add more work on their plate are tools, which is something we discussed earlier. Are there specific tools that you think are a good value to SEs, or would you rather have people go and answer your survey before you bias them?
Well, so yeah, just briefly on my blog, The Sales Engineer Guy, I'm running a quick pre-sales tool survey. So this is just designed to collect anonymous feedback about the vast range of pre-sales tools that are getting funded and released at the moment. And there's quite a lot of them, so please look out for them. That's really exciting. We've done a lot of work, building our own homegrown kind of tools, like using Smartsheets or spreadsheets and Jira boards and Trello boards and things like that, just to show all sorts of views on the workload. But there are some exciting tools coming out there that are more or less designed for pre-sales, and it's a new category. So there's some great stuff to read about if you're interested in that area. In my old organization, we brought in Vivin, which is a pre-sales tool for looking at and managing the pre-sales workload, and actually a tool for people to do their work in as well. So, we're looking at that as well in the current organization. We're looking at other options as well. These kind of tools are good for running the operations. It's like the Salesforce of pre-sales tools. But I think there's also a case to look at the actual tools you use to do demos, the way you prepare videos, the way you do a lot of the work that pre-sales do day in, day out. And some of these might actually help reduce parts of the workload too, right? So if you could automate a lot of your demos, there's tools to help you do that, right? And then you could focus maybe on the more valuable end of the sales cycle, or the more valuable customer segments that you want to spend face-to-face time with. So none of these tools are about reducing the overall amount of pre-sales teams or effort. They're about augmenting what an individual SE can do.
Okay. All right, cool. So salesengineerguy.com. We'll have a link to that in the show notes for the specific survey itself.
Yep, and as we get information about different tools that we've seen a lot of survey responses on, I'll be working with people like yourself, Ramsey, to publish articles about those results. But everyone's information will be protected and anonymous. It'll only be the aggregate kind of level that gets out.
All right, so we won't be able to tell what Benny says. and says anything negative about anybody. All right, it is time to move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions that we ask almost every guest. We've changed the last one on you. I think I've asked you that like way back when. So,
Yep.
but I changed one of the questions, and Benny usually starts us off.
Yeah, actually, maybe just because this is your third time the charm, and start or ending it with a change question, I might tweak the first one as well for you a bit. So normally we ask, what do you love about pre-sales and sales engineering? But instead, what we might ask is, what do you love about changing organizations and starting somewhere new?
So what I love about the change for me was it opened up a whole range of new experiences that also leveraged what I've done in the past and what I learned from that. So, no regrets at all, right? It's always been exciting to do the roles I've done in the past. But I do love what I'm doing right now. It seems to be what I was born to do. And, it's a chance for me to grow, and hopefully, in the future, similar opportunities will arise too. So, even in the same organization, or if I have to change in the future, we'll see when that comes.
Amazing. Sounds good. Makes sense.
All right, second question. What would you change about the SE role as it is known today? Or would you change anything?
I think I'd change a lot, actually. But I think the main thing I'd like to change is not just about the SE role, but it's also probably about the sales role. I think that it needs to be a very strong cooperation between whoever's doing a certain pre-sales role at any point in time and their commercial counterparts, so that they both really have a good teaming aspect, that they understand the common goals, but also what individual actions they can take to make sure that the sales are successful. So I think it's about taking accountability and action. And I think what I would really love to see is that pre-sales gets a good level of recognition for the action that they take, which, is not always visible, because sometimes, maybe we hide the good stuff we do from our own organizations.
Why do you think that is?
Why do we hide it? I don't know. Sometimes there's a big gap, I guess, in time from when pre-sales activity ends to when the deals happen, and all of our recognition is tied to the deals happening, right? So if that time has passed, sometimes you only remember the things that happened close to the end, and some of the POV was 6 months ago, which shouldn't be that long typically, but if it was a long time ago, some of the significance of the difficult things that happened in the POV start to fade away, and that's a problem, I guess. And also we don't accentuate to the customer how hard it was to do a POV, right? We want them to feel like the POV was easy. We just turned it on and it did the job. Yeah.
True. So the next question, you've kind of already alluded to. So typically I'll kind of give you a preempt as to what it is, and then I'll kind of change it up just a little bit. Because it talks about what books, tools, or resources would you recommend. And so obviously the survey is going to play a big part, I think, and the results of that survey is going to play a big part in kind of seeing what types of tools do the community, or does the community as a whole recommend. But even just in the meantime, and you've already mentioned, let's say, Vivin, Trello, Jira, are there any other just tools or resources, probably even maybe books that you've read recently that you think would be helpful for anyone just trying to further their career, whether it be in pre-sales or otherwise?
Yeah. So, I mean, for books, just go back to episode 100 and read the books everyone else has published. They're fantastic books. We did an SE book club internally, which is run by one of my team. And we did the 6 Habits from Chris White, and it's an amazing book, right? Just delving into those individual areas really is a handbook for how to do an individual contributor role really well today. So I really highly recommend that. But I also recommend that people get out there and talk to other SEs in other organizations about how they do their work. So I'm a big advocate for PreSales Collective. I'm part of the PreSales Leadership Collective's council. So I'd naturally tell you to go out there and join up with the collective, but also, just reach out to other SEs and learn from them. And to help do that, I'm actually running a Clubhouse call weekly on Clubhouse, which is called PreSales Talks for PreSales Collective. So anyone's welcome to join that. You don't have to be a part of any other organization. You just need to download the app and ask for an invite to the call, or just join the call.
Which is now available on Android, finally.
It's also available on Android, Apple, and yeah,
Well, it started off on Apple, and
it was just on Apple to begin with, and
Yeah.
it was all in the beta program and all of that. So
Yeah.
it took them a while, but
Yeah, and
I'm glad
I was able to join the last call finally, and lots of great people on there. So it was a great call. Which we talked about nonverbal communication, which is fairly hard on Zoom. So it was a good topic to discuss.
non-verbal communication is even harder on Clubhouse because it's an audio only platform.
Yeah. All right. So can we have a link to that in the show notes? I think we should.
Yeah. I'll give you a link to that.
Okay. We'll add that in there. Last question of the day. Is there a habit that you're working on making or breaking at this time?
It's a good one. I think taking from Chris White's habits, I would say the partner habit is the most important of them all. Acting as a team and making sure you win deals together. And it goes beyond just the individual contributor level, right? Pre-sales leaders need to partner with their sales leaders, need to partner with other parts of the organization, product leaders, and with leaders of customer success, so that they can reach out and help others, but also learn, and find the work that their team can be focused on. So I think that partnering is the strongest thing, and think something that everyone should focus on doing more of.
Nice. All right. Last question of the day, Greg. Where can people reach out and connect with you or find more about you?
Easiest, just look out for salesengineerguy.com, or find me on LinkedIn or Twitter under that name. That would be the easiest. I'll give you all the details to put into your notes, Ramsey.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks a lot, Greg. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. This was a great conversation, and hope to talk to you more in the future.
Happy to be on again. Thanks for having me, and thanks, Binay.
Of course, anytime. Take care.
Thank you, Greg, for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This was a great show. I really loved it.
Yeah, no, agreed. Me too.
Does anything stick out in your mind?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think yeah, so many things. No, I think there's definitely a lot.
I'm asking you that question because I wanted to answer it.
Yeah, okay, fair.
The one thing that sticks out, like, we talked about a lot of great things, but the one thing that sticks in my mind is when I asked him, like, how he convinces people to do stuff, being new. His response was, it's all about selling. You have to listen, and that's like, it's all about selling, and then you have to listen.
It's true.
Which was, we take it for granted, but selling is mainly listening. We always think about selling as persuading, negotiating, and all that. But if you can listen, you would get all the ammunition. Not that we're in a war or anything, but you would get all that information to use it in the negotiation and the persuasion and all that stuff. So that sticks out in my mind. So I like that.
That's super smart. Yeah, honestly, I do remember that, like, that part of the conversation, and you're so right. Like, just the importance of listening, or like how far something as simple as listening can take you, is pretty significant, because like you said, it provides, to repeat everything you said, like, it really does provide you with all the ammo, like whether it be with the direction you have to go in. Maybe they give you some competitive intel, or they give you some like really good feedback, and like they even have that whole strategy about, like, in a negotiation, that silent moment to stay silent, and people just keep on talking, and it's so true. Yeah. And like, people they don't like to be uncomfortable, so they fill the void, and a lot of gold kind of comes out of just listening.
But he's using it even internally within his own company. So
100%. Yeah.
Here's my experience. As an SE, I'm very good at listening. I tend to listen. I tend to use all the skills that sales engineers tend to use. And then I come home and I'm talking to my wife or my kids, and all that skill just goes out the window, right? It's a different dynamic. And you can think about it the same way as going externally with customers or internally, because internally, as a VP, I have the right to tell you what to do, right? So the dynamic changes. But if you don't change it, if you keep that dynamic the same, you'll be able to get a lot more out of your colleagues, your employees, or whoever it is that you need to get something out of. So
yeah, just listen. Like even like if you're higher up, I'd imagine if you're kind of hearing your employees, like, I don't know, they're talking about a certain thing, or you kind of hear what the word on the street is, like, it could be helpful to kind of align or make sure that your team is in alignment with, like, either organizational goals or you're kind of like shifting some things to be in alignment with like their expectations and kind of make sure everything is running smoothly. Like listening is important.
Well, let me ask you this, Vinny. Like, would you respond better to a manager who tells you to do something, you say no because of this, this, and that, and then they convince you because they heard you, or someone whose response is just, I'm your boss and this is what you have to do?
The first one for sure.
And that's it.
Absolutely.
That's pretty much it. Like, if I understand why I have to do something, why I have to use Quip and Salesforce, I would tend to use it better than it's like, oh, you're using it because we told you to use it. The higher ups want you to use it.
Sure.
Like, all right, I don't care about I want to do my job. I don't want to do their job. Right. So anyways.
But if they're hearing you though, like if you're like, if you tell them why it's not as important and they're listening and truly like understand like what you're like saying and it does make sense what you're saying, then and they agree with it, and that's pretty cool as well. So like,
yeah, well, the thing about like if it's coming up from like the global VP of sales that we have to use the software, and I don't agree with using the software, I'm gonna have to use the software anyways.
Sure.
But there's a difference between me understanding why and buying in, or me not understanding why and doing the bare minimum or hacking the system. My previous job, SEs had to use Salesforce to log conversations or whatever. I understood why, mainly because it's like, hey, I want to go on vacation. I don't want to have someone have to call me and ask me about a demo or something. Everything's on there. Many people didn't know. No one went through the trouble of explaining that to them. So what they did was they connected their email to Salesforce. And now every email they send goes and gets logged into Salesforce. And they were winning awards for using the Salesforce the most. But I'm looking at their logs, like, I don't understand any of this.
Right.
So yeah,
that's super interesting actually. that's really, you know what, like I know it's kind of the outro of the show, so we shouldn't like get into it too long, but that's a really like interesting topic for a show we should have, is this whole idea of like things that, I don't know, I guess that benefit the company that we don't do, or like, I don't know, things like that, like inputting things, or like how, I don't know how, like what the topic would be exactly, because like I do it sometimes, I don't do it as often as I should, but I know why I should do it, like that's a big reason for sure.
all right. So there's a couple of call to actions in this show. One was go on to Greg's website and fill up the survey. I already did that. So there's a link to that in the show notes. This is show 168. The second call to action is, if there's a topic that you want to talk about, like about management forcing us to do something and we don't understand why, and we want us to dissect it, let us know. I'm happy to dissect it. And you may be right. There is no reason to do it other than because the higher ups.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not.
Not you. I'm talking about the listeners. They may be right. It's a useless task that we just have to do because that's what management asked, or there could be a reason behind it. So we'll leave it at that.
No, 100%.
All right, let's sign off then.
All right. Well,
you want to do it? Do you want the beard to do it?
Yes.
While playing guitar?
Oh, while playing guitar? I don't know about that. I don't know. This is gonna be a bad outro. Well, sure. All right. What should we do? Well, if you really enjoyed the show today, and you want to have us come out again and have another, rate us on whatever listening platform you're listening to this on. Thank you, Greg, for coming on the show today, as per always. I think we had.
You're not playing the guitar, right?
No, I'm not really too well right now. I can't really multitask too well.
All right. Well, this has been the longest sign off ever. So this is Ramsey for the guitar signing off.